Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
As business attorneys for healthcare practices, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. This season's theme is What Now? Each episode will involve a real client story with a high-pressure moment for that practice.
And before we get started, those watching us in TV land probably already noticed, we want to welcome back again our partner and series regular, Jay Reyero.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. It's a great day. I don't know if you guys know, but today, Katie and I are celebrating our 21st wedding anniversary.
Oh,
wow.
congrats.
And in October of this year, we will have been together for 30 years, which will be exactly 2/3 of my life. So it's a great day. But speaking of
And
pairs,
congrats to Katie, I'll say.
yes, she's a saint.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of lifetime pairs, have you guys heard of the story of Nick and Nora?
Yes, and there almost feels like there's a daily update coming from the Dallas Morning News Metro section, and sometimes even the front page.
Yep.
No idea.
Well, don't worry, they're not movie characters. Not this episode. Nick and Nora are the two bald eagles that have nested down at White Rock Lake since 2021.
Yes, and my son Ellis went to high school near there, and during their first round, they took lots of field trips down there. They did drawings, they did papers on eagles, so it's kind of part of the family lore now.
And audience, yes, I definitely know this story. I just didn't have any idea what they were named or that they had names. But the bald eagles, if you lived in Dallas, has been a massive story. And I guess you mentioned some newspaper. They still make those, Brad?
I have them at my house. I'll show you sometime.
Okay.
Yeah, so their story over the last several years is something straight out of an animated movie. So they built their first nest, and you guys probably know where this is, the edge of a rugby field over in Lake Highlands Park near the lake. But unfortunately, that nest was completely destroyed in the winter of 2022. And so they had to go find something. And 10 days later, they went and they took over and remodeled a red-tailed hawk's nest. And unfortunately, severe storms in the spring of that same year came through, tore that nest completely down. And so they spent the entire season, they found a new spot, built a new nest, and unfortunately there were too many wildlife gawkers and photographers that they actually ended up abandoning that nest. And then in the spring of 2024, they built a new nest. They actually had 2 eaglets that had hatched. And again, just like here in Texas in the spring, really bad thunderstorms, high winds knocked that down. Unfortunately, one of the eaglets was lost and didn't survive, but one did. And we will call him Henley. That's what he's named and known as. And they found him on the ground. They sent him to a rehabilitation center, and they took great care of him.
It really does sound like a story that would be an animation of these 2 eagles and the trials and tribulation of and the first nest, well, it didn't work with the second, but the fourth one held, sort of.
Charm.
I mean, I've lived in Dallas for over 50 years of my life. And it's weird. I don't know how I do that because I'm only 40, but I don't think I definitely never heard of an eagle being in Dallas, nor even the wisp of the idea that you would have an eagle in this area of the world. So I think that's why it's been just such a huge storyline these past few years.
Yeah, well, and great news, Nick and Nora have set up a new nest. This one is down by the lake on my running path. And more importantly, for those of you wondering, yes, Henley was successfully reunited with his parents. All is good there. And this brings us to today. Did you guys know that Nick and Nora successfully hatched a rare brood of 3 eaglets in March of 2026 this year?
Yes, again, referencing that piece of paper I read every morning called the Dallas Morning News. Again, I think they were working overtime on trying to cover every angle and aspect of these eaglets.
Yeah, I'm unlike Brad. I'm more of a modern person and only get my news from social media. And so I guess I don't. My feed's not optimized for the 3 eaglet story, so that is news to me.
Yeah, and the other weekend when I was running, there were all these barricades set up, and you had to wind around them, and it didn't know what was going on. And I came up, and there's all these people there, which isn't unusual for the eagles around the lake. But instead of looking up in the sky, they're actually like looking down at the ground.
And again, as a reader of the Dallas Morning News, and they have not paying sponsorship, well aware of why they were looking down. Jay, why don't you let our audience know?
Yeah, so I looked down as well, and there's an eagle hopping along the ground, just hopping around. And apparently, the 3 eaglets have reached the 2-month mark, which means that they are in this critical development stage known as branching. And so that's where they start walking out on tree limbs, flapping their wings, and kind of building their flight muscles. They're getting ready to fly. And as you can imagine, trying to do that on a branch, they're going to fall to the ground while learning to fly. And because of this, the city of Dallas has closed the nearby playground, set up barricades to block vehicle traffic, and established a very strict perimeter around this area where these eaglets are all hopping around and learning how to fly.
I think we might need to do this for Brad.
You know that wouldn't stop them. Come on now. But don't worry, Nick and Nora, don't have to worry about them. Walkers, cyclists have been allowed to continue through this. They have to keep respectful distances. I kept my distance and went on my run after watching them. But if either of you plan on going down there, be careful, because officials warn that disturbing them could result in fines because they are federally protected birds. And if you happen to do something to cause the death of one, could be fines exceeding $100,000.
So what I'm hearing is, don't be an idiot. Give the eagles and eaglets their space.
Yes. So and news alert, just yesterday, all 3 eaglets did take flight, and they are expected to be fully flying by Juneteenth. So, Brad, I got you flying eagles for your birthday.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
But I thought this would be a great, heartwarming story for today, especially given kind of the topic of our real client story.
Cue the music, I guess. Let's get into today's story then.
Yeah. So let's start today with a married couple out in California. We're going to call them, surprise, surprise, Dr. Nora and Nick. And Dr. Nora was a cosmetic plastic surgeon who owned a practice called White Rock Aesthetics.
I love how we all just really stretch ourselves when we're changing their real names. So I have no idea where you pulled that from, but good. I like it so far.
AI helped me come up with that one.
Yeah.
So White Rock Aesthetics was a thriving practice. Dr. Nora was highly successful, highly sought after, skilled surgeon. Nick was with a business background, ran the weight loss and the hormone replacement, the aesthetic service lines. He was just as instrumental in the business, having kind of made the wellness aesthetic a real important component of the overall practice.
I remember this story well. Both Dr. Nora and Nick, to your point, had really important roles that contributed to the overall success of the practice.
Yeah. So one day we got a call from Nick, and his emotional state, his tone just was completely different from all of our prior conversations. And so, we asked him, what was going on? Was everything all right? And that's when Nick let us know that Dr. Nora had unfortunately passed away the prior day. And his question was, well, what about the practice? What do I do now?
I'm glad, Jay, you started off with that almost animation-like, warm, heartwarming story about the eaglets, because this has got real fast. And I have to say that, having these hard calls like that, even for us cold-hearted attorneys, is pretty hard.
Yeah, these conversations are so hard, and you have to balance empathy for the tragedy, and remember, we have a relationship with that person, so we're processing that news, and then at the same time, a request for direction from the client on what to do, and so it's super awkward trying to figure out, when do I go from being a friend into being the attorney, and then of course the expectation from the client is that we're a stable force, and you're not feeling that at that moment.
Yeah, I mean the last thing when you're having that conversation you want to do, even though that that is your role ultimately in the situation, is start going into the minutia and the details of the cold, hard legal aspects of, essentially keeping White Rock Aesthetics going. And it's during this emotional time. It's a very difficult thing to navigate. So when we were talking to Nick, we kind of got through that piece. And one of the things that, we wanted to focus on, and what Nick wanted to focus on was, the practice ownership. Because Dr. Nora owned White Rock Aesthetics 100%, and Nick had no ownership, and yet he was here left trying to keep the thing going.
And so let's take a step back, taking our hearts off the table, since it's a tragedy they're going through. But for the audience members keeping up, we have a doctor and a non-doctor. And you said this was in California, and for those who don't know, California does have the corporate practice of medicine there, restricting non-physicians from having any ownership in a medical entity unless they meet certain licenses. So there's certain 49% can be held by certain other licensed individuals. But in this particular case, I don't think you said that her husband, Nick, had any type of license associated with it. So pure non-physician with no additional license behind it, meaning that there was a massive restriction on him having any ownership in this practice.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the scenario that you've got a husband who is a key contributor to the business, an entire service line is on his shoulders, and of course, 100% dependent on Dr. Nora as the licensed physician and rock star in her world, and so all of a sudden, he's looking at not just the loss of her revenue stream from her not being there, from a business evaluation perspective, but this corporate practice of medicine issue, which is, is there a path forward for him to continue this business?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously this was structurally what the problem that we were trying to and needing to solve, and we couldn't just make Nick, as you guys were talking about, the owner of the entity. Instead, we needed to build a compliant structure. And so this meant that we were having to start the conversation about MSOs during this difficult time, which it's never an easy time to talk about MSOs. It's a complex thing if you're not, dealing with it from the very beginning, you're not familiar with it. And so now add on the piece of being a very tragic, emotional time, and we're trying to have this conversation about what it's going to look like.
And the good news is there is a solution. I mean, there are, as we'll get into, some things you need to deal with to get to that solution, but there was a path forward.
Yeah, and so as with any MSO model that we're putting together in the CPOM state, the first place you have to start is by having a physician available to be a part of it, and that had never been an issue or a thought, obviously, with Dr. Nora being the physician. And so White Rock Aesthetics didn't even have a junior physician at the time to step in. So it was just Dr. Nora as the only physician involved. And so, we were left with having to start from scratch.
And just some context for those who don't know, we've been throwing out the term MSO. That means Management Service Organization. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the second half. But also, in addition, is understand the impact of the loss of one physician. So this person may have been supervising NPs or RNs or PAs. So it's not just the ownership issue. It's the overall complete impact it has on the practice, because you said she was the sole physician. So what happened next, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, so Nick had to go to work trying to find a physician that would not only be qualified for what they were doing and what they needed, but also willing to come on board into this practice and be part of an MSO model. And as you can imagine from all of our clients who are building these from scratch, that's not a very quick thing usually.
Yeah, when you're talking about this ownership component, what do you do when all of a sudden you've got an estate as an owner of the practice, and how do the medical boards look at it? A lot of the states do give some grace for that transition, when that owner dies, at least as it relates to the ownership piece.
Right, exactly. And the problem was this went beyond the corporate structure issue as well, because there was also the clinical side of things. Brad, you alluded to this, because since Dr. Nora was the only physician involved, that meant no collaboration for the nurse practitioner, no supervision for the registered nurse, not to mention nobody to perform the surgeries for the patients who are already scheduled as it was.
Yeah, and let's just take the surgery component out of it, Jay. I mean, for audience member understanding, like clinical decision making and how things can be approved, there's a branch you kind of have to follow through, and typically, especially in California right now, you still have the physician who has to be overseeing these other individuals. So just because a nurse practitioner could approve maybe a non-invasive services, she still, or he or she still has to have a supervising physician. And although the NP can kind of oversee what the RN's doing, there still is a need for a supervising physician to be overseeing the RN. So it's the inability to even do clinical services right now is another issue they're faced with.
So I'm curious, Jay, how did things go?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the practice ended up losing out on months of revenue because of these issues that needed to be solved while we worked trying to find this physician to come on board. Fortunately, after just a quick few months, Nick was able to secure a new physician to be the head of the practice, and so we immediately worked to restructure the business model to use the MSO model.
Okay, so we can start implementing and start having a business path forward to keep this practice going.
Right. And one of the difficulties that we encountered was shifting all the value from the practice to this MSO where Nick was going to be the sole owner. And so we really needed to give Nick the ownership of the value of the practice. And so we had to transfer a lot of the things that were in this established professional entity to a brand new LLC. And there were some patents and hard assets of value that were really important to get over there.
Yeah. And, if you look back to when it was Dr. Nora and Nick, even though Dr. Nora owned it, it was their business together. They're married, community property state. They built it all there. Well, now, because Nick can't own that business, he owns the MSO under this new model. We need to mimic what they used to have and make that be true in the MSO. And so to your point, we're making all the assets live in the MSO and in a compliant way, building the value proposition so that, this professional entity's true purpose in life is the compliant treatment of patients, but the economics and the value proposition is resting in the MSO.
Yeah, and this is pretty common when it comes to management service organizations where when you have that non-physician who's a part of it, trying to build up some value inside the management service organization. This is how private equity typically does it. So it's not uncommon. And to be clear, if you have the right physician, that physician may be on both sides. They may be an owner of the medical practice and also an owner of the management service organization. But it's another way of building up value of the overall enterprise of what's occurring at the practice level.
Yeah, and let's not forget, kind of taking it all the way back, that this is all happening while the practice is trying to get back to treating its patients and during an unforgiving emotional time for Nick as it was.
Yeah, I mean, think about this, audience members. I mean, not only, it's one thing to have a personal issue that you're suffering through, but in this particular case, it's professional and personal at the same time because it was the practice that he and his wife were running together. And think about the unbelievable burden he has to be carrying because now he's in charge of making sure how these employees, are they still going to stay with us? How can he still employ them? And at all the same time, mourning the loss of his wife, but trying to save her legacy through the practice.
Let's go to break. And on the other side, we can talk through how Dr. Nora and Nick were kind of acting prior to the death using, kind of our framework from this season. And then what would it have taken for them to be acting like Navy SEALs?
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Well, welcome back to Legal 1-2-3s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host Michael Byrd, series regular Jay Reyero. And for our audience members, trying to remember what our theme is this season is what now. Now, Jay, during the season, we've talked a lot about different ways practice owners can act, and we also talked about lots of different things. But prior to her death, let's go take a step back while they're, how did Dr. Noor and Nick fall? Like, how are they acting?
Yeah, I mean, I think they definitely weren't acting like pirates. They had built a solid foundation, had a lot of things in place for an established practice. They weren't, as we like to say, moving fast and breaking things at that point. And they were actually quite the opposite.
Yeah, and audience members, I know that throughout the season we've talked about a lot of different stories, but we do acknowledge that people can be acting in one capacity or not acting like pirates, but eventually they can become pirates by something tragically happening, or in this case, a death, or other circumstances, cash flow issues that I know Michael and I talked about on another show.
Yeah, and so they're not acting like pirates, to your point, Jay. I agree with that, but they are missing something. They didn't have a succession strategy in place, and they built this entire business mutually dependent on the two of them. And then, of course, according to California law, even more dependent on Dr. Nora.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they didn't have that plan, that strategy in place before something happened that could threaten the very existence of the practice.
Yeah. And so I think because of the way they ran the practice, they weren't acting like pirates. I would say that they're acting more like cruise directors. They kind of checked all the boxes of what you would think of like a business startup you would see for the basics of establishing the practice. They really had all the foundational pieces, the operating agreement, the ownership was correct with Dr. Nora owning 100%. They had the employee documents and handbook and just the basics that you would say, hey, give me a checklist to set up. And they were really just steering straight ahead. Things were going well from that perspective.
This makes sense. They had an infrastructure, but we're missing the strategic element.
Yeah, a mistake that many doctors acting like cruise directors can make is they feel safe in the fact that they have that long list of documents that you just described, Jay. But in reality, until you really pressure test, what are your agreements? What do you have in place? What have you confirmed? And have you done your short-term and long-term goals? You really don't know how it's going to work, even though you have all these agreements in place. So, Jay, let's go to the $1 million question here. What would have Dr. Noor and Nick done if they were acting like Navy SEALs?
Yeah, I mean, Michael keeps saying the word, and I think it's so critically important. It's, the strategic element. And here it'd be the strategic exit planning or the strategic what-if scenarios. And so in their case, it would have been using an MSO model, even though it wasn't needed because Dr. Nora could own it 100% and, it was theirs together, overall in their overall marital status. But having the MSO in place at a certain point would have set them up to where that transition after the unfortunate death would have been much smoother and things wouldn't have had been so difficult to deal with in such an emotional time.
Yeah, and audience members, we actually have an ebook out there on which we've talked about MSOs a lot, management service organizations. It's a ebook on a field guide on how to utilize the different ways MSOs can be used in these circumstances. But really taking a step back, this really feels like the discussion you would have with a client on what is their exit strategy, what does that plan look like for them, and that's where we've talked about this before. We have 5 different plans you kind of typically talk about. And I'll kind of talk about a few of them, but like the first one is the fixer-upper plan, which is when you're trying to figure out what your exit strategy looks like, you do an internal dive, both financially and structurally and regulatory, and to say, these are the things we need to fix up so that we can move forward. Then there's also the sensei plan. The sensei plan is, as a physician, you want to bring on a younger doctor, and that younger doctor then eventually buys you out and you retire them, and doing that plan, you teach them how to be a great doctor and hopefully a great owner too. Then there's the mic drop plan, which is you've done well enough that you don't have to really do anything, but so you can like drop the mic and walk out the door. But obviously there's certain things you have to do with the medical boards and patient records that you have to take care of. Then, of course, we have the Gordon Gekko plan, which is the plan you decide to build up something that has a lot of value and sell it to private equity and work for them for 3 to 5 years. And finally, Michael, we have the family heirloom plan. Maybe you could jump in and talk about that one.
Yeah, this is speaks to the circumstance we're talking about now, and in particular, the use of the MSO to build that succession planning. So the idea here would be that while Dr. Noor was alive, that they would have built the MSO model and that they would have built the value proposition in the MSO because they recognized that this was a family business and that Nick was an integral part of running this business, and that they would hope that he would be able to continue the business if something ever happened. And so it really solves a huge part of the problems they face, because in their life while they were together, they would have had the operational infrastructure of the assets and the business functions all resting in this MSO, and they would have had the planning in place for succession, so that when Dr. Nora died, that there would be continuity on that end. Now, the critical piece to this that they also could have done is to have a succession doctor in place who could step in and at least provide the supervision and the ownership solution on the medical side on an interim basis, and that would have solved for this period of time where they had no revenues.
And I think that's the most important part, is during this process, because the strategic element would, from a Navy SEAL's acting like a Navy SEAL, is just having that conversation to know and to be able to be thinking about who would be stepping in that situation.
Yeah, and especially in a CPOM state that we're describing today, developing that strategy ahead of time. And I'll say it this way: it's never an easy conversation to start talking about exit plans, especially when there's death and disability. That's a part of it, but it's an important element of acting like a Navy SEAL, is to be able to understand. Sometimes you get punched in the face, and when you do, how are you going to react? What do you have in place to kind of protect you from that perspective?
Yeah, and look, when we're talking about exit strategy planning, it's really difficult to think about that kind of stuff when it's so far away, or, oh, that will never happen. But that's part of what acting like a Navy SEAL is all about. It's the strategy discussion of knowing when to be thinking about that. Implementing an MSO from day one may not be necessary, but you should understand that it should be a topic of conversation at some point in the overall planning. And so I think that's where the acting like a Navy SEAL, having the team, having the strategy conversation really is beneficial, because you can know when to have those conversations and have it at a time when it's not so chaotic in your life or emotional or whatever's going on.
I think it's intuitive when we talk about acting like a Navy SEAL and to be strategic, to think about opportunities and growth, but not so intuitive to think about these protective measures to protect the business. And so this is a good, sad story to illustrate that. And so I agree with your point there, Jay.
Yeah. So, I mean, going back to the story, started off with a heartwarming story of Katie and I celebrating our anniversary, talked about Nick and Nora. And I think the theme for Nick and Nora, and then Dr. Nora and Nick here, is all about resilience. Nick was able to get the practice restructured, up and running, and it continues to be a thriving practice. And so I think that resilience really is the story of why this was actually a heartwarming story in the end for Nick.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Jay. The emotional aspect of if you have thought ahead of time, you can take the emotions out of it. And in this particular case, Nick was in grieving both for the business and for his personal side, but I'm glad it worked out for him. Yeah. So, Michael, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that it's natural human nature to want to punt down the road things like planning for death and disability and things that you hope don't happen. And yet, if you're going to really tap into that Navy SEAL energy, have your team help guide you through these conversations, and you are optimizing your business in the short term and protecting it in case that event happens.
Well, great. Jay, thanks again for joining us.
Absolutely.
And audience members, we're back next Wednesday when we continue to have these discussions. This time we'll be talking about I'm a board member, what now? Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.